Welcome to the Kuno podcast today, everybody. We've got Bob with us. Bob, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing fine, Marie. Thank you.
So we've had Bob with us before, and he's been on twice now because he's absolutely amazing, and he's got some fantastic books out there, articles, opinion pieces. And what we're looking at today is an extract from his book, Surviving the United Nations, and this extract is called Bob's Laws. Bob, would you like to tell us a bit more about what these laws are about?
Well, essentially what happened was over 2 decades ago, I've always had an interest or a lifelong interest in learning and a lifelong interest in collecting wisdom. So I started collecting quotes. And then I made a decision that I would start looking for quotes of my own. In other words, essential human truths that seemed to me to be more or less, well, universal. Things that were true for all peoples, all places, everywhere. And because I had the unusual opportunity to live and work in 15 different countries over the last 30 years, I've had opportunities that most people might never have. And I started writing some of these things down. And I ended up with 21 of what I call satirically Bob's Laws that take a look at both ourselves and our humanity and things that seem to me to be true and would qualify as wisdom in the philosophical sense.
And we did touch on these slightly last time, so it's really good to get the opportunity to go back in and have a deeper look at them. So if we take one of the first laws, so the first one is people generally believe what they are taught to believe in their youth. In later life, they tend to embrace whatever is the most convenient for them to believe. Essentially, people believe what they wish to believe. Facts hold little sway against often strongly held emotional positions based in those benefits, which are wholly emotionally satisfying but often devoid of reason. That to me seems so straightforward. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that one?
Well, it struck me that time and time again I saw this truism play out. That if, for example, you're born in, say, Rome, you're probably Roman Catholic. If you're born in Mecca, you're probably Islamic. If you're born in Thailand, you're very likely a Buddhist. If you're born in India, you're very likely a Hindu. So we all grow up with these given wisdoms. Okay, this is what we're handed from the day we're born. Now, the truth of those beliefs has nothing to do with what you and I might consider to be the Western notion of rationality. So we're taught what we're taught in our youth. Then as we grow, you have an opportunity to start making your own decisions about those things you have learned, which may be different from what the given wisdom you received in your youth. There are those that will depart from the given wisdom and others that will hang on to it ever more tightly. And these are emotional responses. And these emotional responses tend toward the irrational, but however, they're very emotionally satisfying. And because they're emotionally satisfying, people hang on to them ever more tightly. The bottom line is, I've seen it play out over and over and over again in negotiating tables in Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa, where people will believe what they want to believe, what is most convenient for them to believe, what helps or what cushions their psyches in many cases, and cushions their understandings, what they do and how they do it. However, their beliefs, whatever those beliefs are, religiously based, or like National Socialism under the Nazis in Germany, could be a secular belief system, or like communism was a secular belief system. The bottom line is that there's no rationality in it. And without that rationality, you lose some sense of yourself. The other thing is, in terms of negotiations, how do you negotiate with someone who has a belief system which is diametrically opposed to your own? Where do you find compromise? You find compromise in rationality. You find compromise in common good. But belief systems, which tend to be exclusive instead of inclusive, are in the way.
So if we find ourselves in this position, which we mostly do most days, how can we then create a connection with somebody who might have, and it's it might be wrong or right to hold beliefs that are emotional, and driven so that they're convenient for people, but how can we kind of work with that as people dealing with other people?
If you're a leader or if you're a negotiator, then you try and stay off of the topic of belief systems, and you try and stay on the topic of what's rational, what's logical, what's practical, and what's doable in your given context. So, in any negotiation, do you want to talk about religious matters, belief systems, what you believe versus what I believe? Not a particularly useful conversation. So, my in negotiations, always try and stay off of those topics and try and stay on point. If you're a leader, we have to respect people's belief systems. Of course, you have to respect them. However, in terms of what we do as leaders, we have to at the same time get the job done. And trying to find a middle ground between the respect for someone's belief systems and getting the job done can sometimes be problematic. However, that's the job.
Does that get any easier with experience? And is there a point at which it gets very difficult and ends up on a knife edge to be able to accomplish that?
Depends on the circumstances. One of the things one of the benefits that I had was when I was serving with the United Nations, I attended Scotland Yard's uh, hostage crisis management program, essentially how to be a hostage negotiator. And then I ended up consulting on a dozen kidnappings in Yemen a few years later. It was obviously a very difficult, very demanding cultural context, not my cultural context at all. It was necessary for me to conduct, believe it, a scholarly study to try and make a determination what was different about hostage taking in Yemen. And what I found out was it was really quite different. So much different that hostage taking in Yemen is actually an unusual form of conflict resolution. I know it came as a surprise to me too. What a sheikh would do is he would authorize a kidnapping. They would generally go into the town, the national capital of Sana'a. They would find somebody that looked like me, generally a Westerner, because they make better, how can I say this, better hostages for them. Because what the tribal leader generally wanted was something from the central government, something from President Saleh at that time in the year 2000, 2001, and 2002. And what they would do is they would take someone hostage and then treat them like a visiting guest. There was actually one gentleman that I debriefed that went into put on 5 pounds while he was a hostage. He was treated that well. He had the freedom of the village in large measure. There was somebody with an AK-47 following him around, and he was a guest in someone's home every day. Every different day, he was hosted in someone else's home until the sheikh got what he wanted from the president, and then the hostage was released unharmed. Now, do you want a SWAT team going into this village, shooting it up, trying to get the hostage out? No. It requires patience, comprehension, understanding, and if you know what's going on and you can counsel patients, well, long story short, I consulted on a dozen kidnappings and everybody got to go home alive. That's a point of enormous personal pride for me.
Wow, that is an accomplishment and also a testament to your skill in that area.
Well, it's kind of you to call it a skill. However, necessity demanded I take a deeper look at it because I was out of my depth. And when you're out of your depth, okay, stop digging. Okay, you got to stop. You got to think it through. I didn't really have a choice. I had to stop long enough to figure it out. And when I did figure it out, it came as a shock. It came as a surprise. I ended up consulting, like I said, on a dozen different kidnappings. Everybody got to go home alive. Apparently, I found something that was right, but it was specific to that cultural context. And it's important to understand that the cultures are going to be different than the kinds of things you and I grew up with. It's a level of understanding that you can only get by being there and by digging your heels in and working hard to comprehend what's going on around you.
I feel like you're distilling decades of experience into this one quote. It's such a strong fundamental law for the first law. So, I'll carry on.
Well, no, that's exactly why I put it up first, because it seemed to me to be universal. It seemed to me to be applicable cross culturally, all peoples, everywhere. This is something that is true, I believe, of all humans universally. And if that's wisdom, I think it is, then that's why it's Bob's first law.
So, moving from Bob's first law to Bob's fifth law, I like this one. One's ego is frequently an impediment to learning the truth. Do you want to tell us a bit about that one?
Well, here's something I've noted too. And one of the things that helped me to come up with number five was in my youth, and even a little bit later, I had difficulty with my own ego. Um, it wouldn't surprise many women to find that, for instance, my wife was not surprised that I had ego issues. Not too little, too much. Too little is a problem. Too much is enough. Luckily, I'd survived long enough to ameliorate some of those rough edges surrounding my ego. Um, I noted that I could walk into a room with an essential truth, a fact, or a series of facts that everyone in the room knew to be facts. And yet, if I presented those facts to someone whose ego was invested in another set of facts, alternative facts, they would fight me twice as hard. How do you get around something like that? You first have to conquer your ego and help someone else conquer theirs. How do you help someone else conquer their ego? What do you think, Marie?
Oh my goodness. I'm just going to say I've been in these positions before and I've still got no idea what one's supposed to do when the other party's got such a stance and they maybe believe a certain thing and they want a certain outcome and it's difficult to move them. So I'm open to any advice on this.
Help them. Help them. At this point, you have to be empathic. And empathy is, at least in my poor judgment, empathy is the first most important personal characteristic in any leader. It's also the most important characteristic in any negotiator. If you are non-empathic, I'm not sure you can be a good leader. If you're non-empathic, I'm absolutely 100% certain you can't be a good negotiator. So if you have empathy, then you have to help your your adversary, your opponent, and you need to think about him differently. Instead of as an adversary or opponent, maybe you need to think of him or her as a potential partner. If you're conducting a negotiation, you're looking for common interests. So the first thing you do cross culturally is establish something. You go high. And by going high, you go to humanity. So, what do all human beings have in common? All of us have families, or almost all of us have families. Everyone I know has a family. You try and make a human connection first. And this is the bridge in cross cultural communications. If you are taken hostage, one of the first things we tell people to do is try and make yourself a human being to your captors. Show them photographs, for example, of your children, of your wife, of your mother and father. Engage them, make sure that they know that you're a human being. In that process, they will recognize your humanity and you will recognize theirs. You can cut through these belief systems by making a human connection. But you have to make the leap. In large measure, they can't.
So, in a situation where you've gone into a meeting and you've not had any time prior with the person that's the opponent in this, how can you, within a short space of time, try and, especially if there's 10 or 20 people in the meeting, how can you try and use these techniques?
Well, believe it or not, when I was working in the Balkans, it was as simple as showing up with a carton of cigarettes. I'm not kidding. Everybody in the Balkans back then, we're talking not long after the Balkan War, I was appointed as the defense advisor to the Bosnian Ministry of Defense. And I used to conduct difficult negotiations with Bosnian Muslims, Croats, and Serbs. I can tell you the tripartite presidency wasn't working, but I still had to conduct meetings with all parties concerned and see if I could find common cause between all three parties. One of the first ways to do that is to make a personal relationship or to develop a personal relationship. If you can't get things done professionally, then give it a shot personally. So, for example, I was invited to go boar hunting in Gorazda in the Balkans in the middle of the winter, which is something I grabbed hold of and of course, did. And I provided gifts, for example, those people that I worked with. So one of them was a guy by the name of Hamid Bato, and I gave him an American Bowie knife, which is a great big knife, but a very manly kind of thing. And of course, Hamid was into manly stuff. He appreciated that knife very much. One of the other things that a lot of the folks in the Balkans seemed to like was Zippo lighters. And of course, extra cigarettes, because everybody in the Balkans smoked. You can, through small gestures, through large gestures, by going boar hunting with this general, by spending time with him, but meeting his family, okay, meeting others' families. You can get a lot done if you form or have the time to form a personal relationship, and sometimes get things done that nobody else can.
I'd like to follow up on this by asking a sideline question of, do you think that it's different in this circumstance for males and females? And do you think there's a difference in the way that they should approach the situation?
Absolutely, no question. Women tend to be more empathic. The problem is, at least from my perspective, and based on my experiences in Africa, for example, if you're dealing with a cultural context where you're dealing with an African warlord, let's say in South Sudan, Darfur, somewhere in the Sahel, or in West Africa, they look at women as chatons. They really look down on women. Now, is it a good idea to take a woman and place her in a position where she's going to fail because the individual she has to deal with, okay, is an outrageous misogynist and an outrageous chauvinist? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the circumstances. I've had females working for me as security officers in very tough circumstances that performed beautifully, and we're able to conduct these kinds of negotiations. The reason why is because in some cases, your adversary, your opponent, the person you want to conduct a negotiation with, is going to feel less threatened by a woman. But here we're back to the cultural context again, and the individual. Who is this individual? In the case of Sierra Leone, the overwhelming majority of the Revolutionary United Front had engaged in mass rapes of women. I'm quite serious. Every single day in my office in Sierra Leone, reports hit my desk about mass rapes of women from 7 to 70, conducted by the Revolutionary United Front. It was horrible. It was horrifying. Now, do you want to take a female security officer and put her in a position where she has to deal with people like that and face that potential threat? Of course not. Does it mean that that female security officers can't perform that function in other cultural contexts and do it extraordinarily well? Absolutely. You just have to be conscious of the fact that within given cultures, females are going to be seen one way or another, and to capitalize on that. You can use that femininity or choose not to. You can send a male or a female based on who is most likely to be successful given that cultural context, given the individual you're dealing with.
I think that's a really interesting answer. So from this question, moving on to the sixth Bob's law, humankind is defined by its mortality and fallibility. The best of us accept that we are short-lived and imperfect vessels striving to be better than the sum of our parts. Would you give us a bit of background on this one?
Many of the warlords that I've had to deal with over the years, they thought of themselves based on their activities, based on what they did. They acted as if they were immortal and infallible. And they had egos. I told you I had an ego problem in my youth, okay? I'm an absolute piker compared to these guys. These guys thought the sun rose and set behind their heads. They could never steal enough. They could never rape enough. They could never amass enough power, because I think in large measure they're afraid. And that gets me to the second one, fallibility. First, you have to know you're mortal. You know it. I know it. For me, I'm 69 years old next month. There are fewer years ahead than there are behind. I think it's wise to take a look at that and say, how do I want to spend my waning years? How do I add meaning to a life which for me has been very meaningful? And what purpose can I serve as I move on? And the fallibility thing is extraordinarily important because it leads us to humility, another positive character trait for a good leader or a negotiator. I've seen negotiators and I've seen leaders who lacked humility, altogether lacked humility. They knew they were right, they were smart, they were capable, and they would make it happen. Well, you can't make it all happen. You can't. We are mortal. We're going to die. When I was at the Canal Hotel in Baghdad, 22 people died in one day in one jihadist suicide bombing. 22 people dead, over 150 people wounded. Are we mortal? Yes, we are. And we are imperfect vessels. We are fallible. So if you're both mortal and fallible, some humility is in order. Now, if you recognize that, and here I was careful with my words, the best of us accept that we are short-lived and imperfect vessels striving to be better than the sum of our parts. The best of us. Many of us don't think about it at all. They just don't. I think about it. Obviously, I've written about it. It's something that is not a given wisdom, but something that's based in my experience and personal observations. And I've had many, many failures. And this is one of my other laws. And it's obviously common knowledge, but that failure remains the best teacher. Why? Because we remember our failures. So I just thought number 6 was pretty important. Again, it's human wisdom, it's universal, it's applicable literally to everyone you know, both genders, all colors, all religions, all creeds. It's a universal human truth. And that's what I was trying to capture with the satirically named Bob's Laws.
I think this could be one of the more hard ones for people to maybe identify with? Because I think on a superficial level, we all say, yeah, we know we're mortal, we know we've only got a certain amount of time, but actually deep down we think, well, no, actually we're immortal, and we don't even want to think about being mortal because it's too scary, so let's run away from it and go shopping or something. So how can you kind of, address these things without, panicking and being scared and that kind of thing?
There's only one way. There's only one way. You have to face your fears. You have to. If you can ignore, you can ignore it all and pretend it doesn't exist. But does it help you in any meaningful way? I don't think so. But if you face your fear, you understand your mortality, and you accept and take accountability for your mistakes, because we all make mistakes, all of us, every single one of us. And good leaders know that. And good leaders share that, meaning that the good leader will actually look at his people and say, look, I'm not perfect, I'm far from it. I need your help, working together with all of our minds, all of our hearts, all of us working together to get the job done.
So from law 6 to law 7 was one that I think we talked about a fair amount last time. Doing the right thing invariably means doing the hard thing. This is the true meaning of the word honor within a Western cultural context.
Yes. And here's the cultural thing again. Honor and I just validated this. I was doing an interview with a gentleman from originally who was from Uganda, and it was based in my experience. I compared and contrasted my experience in West Africa with what he told me. The bottom line is this: is that being honorable in a sub-Saharan African context might mean doing what's best for you, your family, your village, and your tribe. That's it. That's honor. If you do that, you are an honorable person. Now, for you and me, growing up in the United States, in Great Britain, our idea of honor, our idea of doing the right thing is quite different. We have an abstraction in our societies about what constitutes being honorable and doing. If I ask you, what does doing the right thing mean? What does it mean to you?
I'd probably start to rely on the moral code of, selflessness and self-sacrifice and not stealing other people's ideas and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, yes. And if you look at the United Nations, for example, and go to the website of their ethics office, you'll find the Western definition that pretty much matches what you said, but it's not the African definition. So we have different cultural norms, different definitions of what constitutes honorable behavior for perhaps Africans and perhaps those from the UK and the United States, or perhaps from other places as well, who may yet have different definitions of honor. It's necessary for us as good leaders, as good negotiators, to understand that at the beginning of the negotiation. Otherwise, the negotiation will work toward cross purposes. We won't get to yes. We won't get there. So it's a very important understanding of the differences that are given to us by our cultures. Also, those sub-Saharan Africans, for example, who sign on the dotted line on a United Nations contract, they agree to comply with the Western definition of what constitutes honor, but they have very strong ties to their family, village, and tribe, and sometimes those cultural norms are in conflict. And when they come into conflict, do they comply with the abstraction that you and I know and understand? Or do they comply with those norms that they've lived with all of their lives? I think I know.
That's really interesting. It's a really difficult position to be in between cultures where the understanding is really different like that, I think. And it comes back to your other laws that talk about culture and how we need to be aware of it. So I think these are such important points. And I want to rush on to do 20 just before we go, because we've not got a lot of time
Sure.
left. But number 20 is there is only one race, the human race. Issues we think we know and understand as racial are non sequiturs. Skin colour is not now, nor has it ever been, a behavioural determinant, but culture often is. Never confuse the one with the other.
One of the things I see playing out in my own country, in the United States right now, um, race wars, and we're talking about white supremacy. Um, the editor of the Dutch magazine Atlantic Perspectives just asked me to write a 2,500 word essay on American extremism. My early research suggests that there is a racial component to this, meaning that in many cases it's a white person's thing. That struck me as, isn't that fascinating? That white people in America could be extremist in the same way that ISIS might be extremist, or the Irish Republican Army might have been extremist. There are certain similarities. Probably the most important thing is, again, from my perspective, is that we understand that there is only one race. This is my observation with almost 2 decades with the United Nations. I had an opportunity to serve with people from every country, every religion, every creed, every ethnicity, from Tierra del Fuego at the base of South America to Mongolia. We are all the same. Our cultures divide us, and geneticists have proven these are facts now. Geneticists have proven that human beings are 99.5% the same. Full stop. That's a fact. Our genetic material doesn't lie. 0.5% is different. That's mostly about how we look. That's it. So we are 99.5% the same, 0.5% different. And that 0.5% different, how we look, is where we tend to focus all of our attentions. Please. It's stupidity squared. And yet, it's driving societies mad. So, skin color is not now, nor has it ever been a behavioral determinant, but their culture, radical Islamic culture, is determinant. Radical white supremacist culture is determinant. If we take the color out of it and just look at the human being and understand that human beings exist on a continuum, and that you and I are probably somewhere in the middle, and then we have radical leftists and radical rightists. Who is the real enemy here? From my perspective, the real enemy is fanaticism, because fanaticism is the enemy of reason. And what does every negotiator know? Reason is the best way forward in any negotiation. How well can you negotiate with ISIS adherents who cut off people's heads and then dance around joyfully about it? I'm sorry, I'm not sure there's a lot of negotiation I care to do with people like that. It may be that the best way to serve society's ends, civilization's ends, is to put a bullet in each and every one of those individuals that engages in those kinds of activities. I'm sorry, I just don't think they deserve a lot of consideration. I might be wrong. Then again, I might be right. In any case,
it's a really good way of looking at it. The culture aspect of it.
For me, it is. For me, it is. And I have the unusual trifecta of having supported counterterrorism, that's active measures, working in anti-terrorism in the United Nations, defensive measures, and I've also been the victim and survivor of a jihadist suicide attack. I just don't know too many people that have done all three. What having all three happened to me, it forced me to think about these things more deeply. And I came to these conclusions after long, hard experience and after thinking about it for several years.
I had this discussion a few weeks ago because there's categorical ways of grouping people. Say at the minute we've got a categorization that is Black, Asian, and minority ethnic. And I said, well, how can you possibly group people together like that and just completely disregard their rich cultural heritage and the way that they live their lives just to put them in that one big category together? That to me seems slightly disrespectful.
It is and can be disrespectful until we get to the point where all peoples everywhere recognize that we are all essentially and fundamentally the same. We're stuck with these largely political and sometimes emotional labels. Um, I've noted the propensity on the part of human beings to search desperately for labels. They need some way to put you, me, and others into a category which makes us comprehensible. So I've had people call me put all these odd labels on me. They've seen some of my interviews or they've read some of my commentaries, and they'll immediately label me as either this thing or that thing. Every label that has been put on me by people that write hate mail, for example, has been wrong. But it's their label. It makes them more comfortable if they think they can understand me by hanging a label around my neck. And unfortunately, it's a general human failing. It's not specific to Western culture. I found it in Papua New Guinea, okay, with people literally that have a bone in their nose, walk around naked, okay, and are former cannibals. At least I think they're former cannibals. I'm still here, so maybe they're still, maybe they've become vegetarians. I don't know. The bottom line is that we find ourselves in these horrible, horrible circumstances, dividing ourselves, labeling everybody, and it does everyone a massive disservice.
I think so. I agree with that. I think that we could be a lot more tolerant and a bit less hasty to put labels on people and try and understand people for who they are. And I think that comes back to a lot of what you say through these laws and the vast experience that you've got and the decades of, experience and wisdom and skills that have gone into these laws. And you've seen so much. I just think that they are, everybody should read them because they're just so fundamental.
Thank you so much. I actually wrote these 21 laws for predominantly myself, and then a friend of mine suggested that I had to put them in the book. So I created an appendix to the book and put them there. I'm glad I did. They were meant to be shared. I over the last 20 years, I sent them to lots of different people asking for comment and criticism. Over the years, I got fewer and fewer comments and less criticism. And I got to the point where I got to 21 Bob's Laws, and most of the people that were looking at these said, yeah, that's right.
Well, coming on to your book, as we're coming up to the end of the interview, do you want to tell people about your book and where they can find you on the internet?
Sure. Okay. This is the book right here. Okay, Surviving the United Nations. It's about my first 4 years working for the United Nations as an international staff member, first in West Africa, then in Yemen, and then in Iraq. I had several terrifying adventures. It was enlightening, interesting, fascinating, horrifying, and damn near killed me. Um, uh, there's not a dull moment in the book, according to what I've been told by the people that have read it. I have yet to receive a bad book review. I've been looking for my first one. I've been writing and publishing for 40 years. I can always find someone that disagrees with me. I have yet to get a bad book review on this book. So I can't tell you. I'm very very pleased. And my publisher told me that uh, literally every major university in the United States has already added my book to their library. Um, as a scholar, for me, I just hit a home run. Okay, I've made a hat trick in soccer in football terms. It doesn't get any better than that for someone like me. So I'm very very happy with the book. I'm very very happy to be making presentations like this one or interviews. I'll be doing more presentations as time goes on. I'm leaving for Rome shortly, then to the United States, and I've recently been accepted into the University of Kent's creative writing graduate program in Paris. So if everything goes as planned, I'll be starting school again. This will be my third graduate degree in creative writing in Paris in September. And I hope at the end of that to publish a novel, one I've already started.
Well, I've got your book and I'm starting to read it. So when you end up in Paris, I might just drop over and get you to sign it.
Actually, you're like the 51st person to tell me that. Bob, if you're going to Paris, okay, I'm coming over and I'm going to drink up all your wine. And you're welcome, Marie.
You're going to have a very big bill at the end of it.
I'd love to see you there, Marie, by all means.
When it's possible, I shall be there because I love Paris. It's very nice in the autumn. Thank you so much for being a guest today again, Bob. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And as much as I can speak to you all day, I think we've done quite a long extended interview today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie. My pleasure. You take care now.